So this plenary session on human rights says, where do human rights fit in? We will start by bringing on the councillors for the session, and first up, an incredible South African who has spent his life fighting injustice, previously as the head of Greenpeace and today as the Secretary General of Amnesty International. Please welcome Kumi Naidoo.
Next up, a Sri Lankan actress and former model who's become a Bollywood legend. She's passionate about her humanitarian work and was awarded the Humanitarian of the Year Award at the 2017 Asian Voice Charity Awards. Please welcome Jacqueline Fernandez.
Next up, an entrepreneur who's responsible for revolutionizing media in Afghanistan, across Asia, and in the Middle East. The founder and the CEO of Mobi Group, sponsoring his first One Young World Scholarships for young leaders from Afghanistan and Ethiopia. Please welcome Saad Mohseni.
And next, we have the Vice President of Gilead Sciences International Access Operations. He oversees the development and management of innovative manufacturing, distribution, and business models to make the company's HIV medicines available at affordable prices in the developing world. Please welcome Clifford Samuel.
It's our first councillor from the Caribbean. Next up, an actress committed to speaking out against wrongdoing towards women and minorities. A powerful advocate also for refugees, Amber Heard.
And a woman who speaks truth to power and whose state capture report into corruption brought down President Zuma of South Africa, the former public protector of South Africa, and Forbes African of the Year advocate, Thuli Madonsela. And now, give a huge welcome and a huge cheer to our delegate speakers. Now, before we actually start this session, we want to do something really important about a horrific abuse of human rights. 2 years ago, the One Young World All-Bar-None scholar from Saudi Arabia was an incredible woman by the name of Lujain Al-Hathloul. She'd already been in prison when she came to One Young World because she basically fought against the ridiculous ban on women driving in Saudi Arabia. And so they'd arrested her, and they'd been harassing her, and she was in prison again for 73 days a couple of years ago. Now, whilst many people in the world read about the fact that the ban on women driving in Saudi Arabia had been lifted and celebrated that and thought it was a great thing, the unbelievably evil and cynical thing that the regime did was it snatched all of the activists, and they actually took Lujain from the UAE and imprisoned her in Saudi Arabia. And we have had no news on what is going on and what has happened to her. Just an appalling abuse of human rights. one of the amazing One Young World leaders. And what we just want to do is just call on the world to act and see if we can start the little wave in this room to see if out of those atrocities that happened in Turkey recently, we can't get some attention for Lujain and the other activists and get them out of prison.
So this is where we can make a difference and use the power of social media that you have in your hands for something hopefully very positive. So could you all take out your phones and devices, tweet in solidarity, oh, it makes me want to cry. Tweet in solidarity with Lujain and fellow activists, support them in their cry for gender equality, and demand that the Saudi government set them free. Please use the hashtag #FreeLujain.
So if we just all do that, if you don't have your phone, you can do it later as well. The hashtag is FreeLujain, which is LOUJAIN. JAIN, sorry. Can we put, yeah, there we go. Hold that up for a minute. You'll all be much faster than me, so by the time I've got it done, I know you all have done. Great, thank you very much. Kumi, would you like to start us off, please? Wherever, if you want to stand on the front or behind the lecterns.
Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my dear brothers and sisters. When we talk about SDGs and human rights, we need to start with recognizing that the SDGs was a product of many negotiations that delivered this broad set of goals for us to advance the interests of humanity. But I want to start by saying something that you probably didn't expect me to say. The SDGs is not perfect. It is a product of compromise. So therefore, when I speak to young people, I say, you have the capability to imagine even more than what the SDGs puts on the table, and I want to encourage you to do that. The second point I want to make is that when I engage with young people, often they ask me, what advice do you have as an activist that started young? And I say, my most important advice that I give you is do not put faith in the current bunch of adult political and business leaders, because it is our generation that has led us to a precipice of disaster. And if young people accept the slogan that young people are the leaders of tomorrow, there might not be a tomorrow for you to take leadership given the realities of climate change. Now, as we've seen from our sister in Saudi Arabia, we are seeing all around the world young people standing up for justice, saying that enough and no more. And sadly, many of them are paying a major price for their willingness and the courage to stand up. But to those of you who sometimes look at what's happening in the world, when we see the devastation of our people in Syria, I was in Raqqa last week, and I can tell you that even though I've seen some terrible things in my life, I've never seen such devastation of one city where, in fact, the US-led coalition is just as culpable as ISIS for the damage that they've done to the people of Iraq. Now, young people must also recognize that the older generation always is questioning, are they too immature? And often I think the older generation looks at young people as sort of half empty rather than half full, if you know what I mean. They're looking at what young people don't have rather than what young people have. And that's a mindset change that we need. But I just want to share with you that this question of getting things wrong as young people is absolutely fine. When I was 15 years old, when I participated in my first demonstration, I was at the front of the march demanding equal education. The slogan at the front of the march was, "We want equality." By the time the slogan got to the back of the march, the younger kids were chanting, "We want a color TV." And that didn't matter because kids in white schools had color TVs and kids in black schools had no TVs. But what I want to say is young people have the license. Young people have the license to get things wrong, because why should you not have the license to get things wrong and experiment when my generation has repeatedly got things wrong over and over and over and over again? I want to share with you a perspective from Martin Luther King, speaking in 1965, when he said, "My friends, as I come to the end of my speech, I want to note that in the field of psychology, there's a very dominant term called maladjusted." This is all Martin Luther King speaking, okay? Now, we all want to be well-adjusted and not suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. But my friends, I say to you that there are certain things in our world that are so unjust and immoral that good, decent people should refuse to be well-adjusted to. He went on to say, "I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to racial discrimination. And importantly," he said, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few, when millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society." Now, while he was, please don't clap, I'm running out of time here. So basically, what he was saying is that he was making observation of the United States in the mid-60s. But that reality is 100 times worse in the United States today, and it applies to all our countries all over the world. So I would encourage young people to believe that what they can bring to public life is the freshness of your lenses, meaning we need new perspectives on all problems. We need new ways of thinking, and when we look around the world, there are young people primarily, right, with exceptions, who are coming up with new ways of thinking, whether it's around energy, whether it's around gender equality, whether it's about how we respect LGBTIQ rights, whether it is about urban-rural balance in terms of how we invest public resources and so on. And so young people must now see their role as challenging the status quo in fundamental ways. Because, you know, I used to be at Greenpeace, and when I was at Greenpeace, and still I say it every now and then, we need to save the planet. The good news, dear friends, is the planet actually does not need saving. Because if we continue on the path that we are, what will be the end result? We warm up the planet to a point where our water resources are gone, our soil is gone, we cannot plant food, we heat up the planet to the point where it becomes unimaginable to live. And then the end result would be we will be gone, the planet will still be here. And actually, once we become extinct as a species, the forests will recover, the oceans will replenish, and so on. Don't worry about the planet. Understand the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change. And we heard last week that we have 10 to 12 years to reverse the path that we are on. 10 to 12 years. That's not a long time, right? And the end result of not averting catastrophic climate change is threatening your future, your children's futures, and future generations. And so the major change that we need to make is to design a society that respects human rights at the core. And for us at Amnesty International, the reason why we are now saying we need a bigger and bolder and more inclusive movement is because we see all the different challenges connecting together. And of course, as a human rights organization, we are opening our hands right now, embracing the struggle for climate change, as well as a range of issues that historically we had not addressed, and to say to each and every one of you, especially the young people, come join us, come challenge us, come be part of us, because the reality is all movements, including Amnesty International, need young people much more than you need young people, than you need Amnesty or any other organization. We need your voice, we need your perspective, we need your energy. As I conclude, I want to celebrate what young people, and particularly young human rights defenders, are doing all around the world. Nelson Mandela said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the overcoming and triumphing over it." I can tell you that when I was in Raqqa last week, I would be lying to you if I said to you, as I was going through multiple roadblocks and so on, that I was not scared. You carry a certain level of fear in difficult, hostile, unsafe environments. But the challenge for each and every one of us now is to have a sense of courage where we can overcome fear, not just in terms of what we do, but also in terms of what we imagine society can be moving forward. And in paying tribute to young people who are losing their lives for standing up for human rights and justice around the world, for young people who are in prison, young people who have been, are now having to live with disabilities because they were in the front line of violence against them from multiple quarters. I want to, from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of Amnesty International, pay tribute to all the young people around the world who are standing up for justice and standing up for equality and standing up for human rights and standing up for their futures. And I want to conclude by paying tribute, if I can get the slide please, of one such human rights defender from Venezuela. So, Geraldine was detained on 1st of February. The intelligence services went to her house at 2 a.m. in the morning. Because what was she doing? She was working with at-risk poor youth, right? In neighborhoods in Caracas. 4 months later, after enduring indescribable conditions in prison, where she was denied food and water for long periods of time, she was released. She would wanted to have been part of the Amnesty delegation to this very event. But the Venezuelan government has denied her the right to travel and has denied, and she has to report to the police station every 30 days. We want to use the solidarity of the people here to send a message to Geraldine and many other young people who are facing repression that they are not alone and that we stand with them. And I want to please ask you to take out your cell phones once again and send a message. If you can go to amnesty.org, Geraldine, and send a message that we stand with Geraldine in your own language and in your own message, and to say that she's not alone and neither are any of the people that are standing up for justice, young or old. Let me leave you in conclusion with a small story which is sad, but it's intended to be inspirational, so please focus on the inspirational side and don't focus too much on the sad side. When I was 22 years old, I was fleeing South Africa into exile. My best friend at that time, a guy called Lenny, asked me a question. He said, "Kumi, what is the biggest contribution we can make to the cause of humanity?" And I said, "That's a simple question, giving your life." He said, "You mean going, participating in a demonstration, getting shot and killed, and becoming a martyr," which was happening all the time in Tuli and my country at that time in the 80s. And he said, "That's a wrong answer." He said, "It's not giving your life, but giving the rest of your life." I was 22 years old that time. Lenny was ahead of us intellectually. He was the first environmental activist I met. And at that time, I think he was only one of like 2,000 voluntary vegetarians on the entire African continent, right? So he was a special person. So we go into exile in different directions. And then 2 years later, I hear that my friend Lenny and 3 young women from a home city were so brutally murdered. There were so many bullets in their bodies, the parents could not recognize them at their mortuary when they went to identify them. So I had to think deep and hard about the distinction he made between giving your life and giving the rest of your life. It's a very important distinction. For all those of us who are in this room, we have a privilege of education, knowledge, voice, and capability. And what he is saying, the struggle for justice is not a sprint, but it's a marathon. It's a long-distance race. And the best that each and every one of us can do is to have perseverance, have stamina, have courage, continue to push and push and push until human rights are genuinely shared by all, until we create the kind of society where human beings are treated with dignity, respect, and where what people are asking for are simple things: water, housing, sanitation. By the way, sanitation is just a fancy middle-class way of saying people don't have a place to shit and piss. We should say it like that because then those with power would recognize the indignity that so many people have to live with. So these are simple things that people are asking for. We have the ability to deliver this to everybody. We have the knowledge, we have the technology. What is missing is political will, and I urge you to do everything you can to ensure that our politicians, who all seem to be suffering from the same medical problem, which is they all seem to have a problem hearing. So the only way they will hear us if we speak loudly, boldly, and courageously, and I believe you can do that. Please join Amnesty and get involved in our struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumi, and also thank you for the amazing work that Amnesty does. So now this is our first plenary, so I'll do a quick reminder of how they work. Our amazing counselors are keynote listeners in this session, and what they do is they introduce each of the delegate speakers, who will then stand at the lectern and deliver their speech. I think counselors, if you're all mic'd up, you can stay seated. If you're not mic'd up, then maybe others are mic'd we can pass around. And I think we're starting with Jacqueline introducing Yasmin.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. This is my first time at One Young World, and I have to say thank you so much for having me here today. This has definitely been the most enriching, inspiring, enlightening experiences I have ever had. I come from an industry where I work, where my co-actors are also referred to as heroes, but you guys really are the heroes. So which is why right now, at a time when the Me Too movement has swept across my industry and swept across India, I'm so proud to announce my delegate, Ms. Yasmin Majali from Palestine. Yasmin is the founder of She's so beautiful and so inspiring. Yasmin is the founder of a socially conscious fashion brand called Baby Fist, which I found to be a very, very cute name for a brand, but such a powerful force to reckon with. The proceeds of her brand go towards women empowerment projects in the West Bank, which she has been working on over the past year. She's beautiful, as you can see. She's fearless, she's focused, and she's just inspiring so many women to speak up, to start conversations on a topic where a lot of women are afraid. It's really not common to discuss things like sexual harassment, and this is such an amazing step forward towards women's rights. So everyone, Yasmin.
In 2017, I became very aware of what it means to be a woman, both universally, but more specifically, in Palestine. Nearly every day on the streets, I was harassed. I felt so many eyes on my body that I became ashamed of even having a body. I struggled with what to wear and with what not to wear, I struggled to even be on the streets at all. So I began to hide myself from the world. I dressed conservatively and learned to keep my head down. I forgot the color of the sky and instead memorized the cracks on the sidewalks. Eventually, International Women's Day rolled around, and something changed within me. Watching women organize marches in cities all over the world, I knew that this was something I wanted to partake in. That day, I put on a blue denim jacket that I hand-painted, and I walked through the streets of Ramallah with the words, "Not your Habibti," on my back, which is Arabic for, "Not your baby." I was finally saying what I had never had the courage to say before. Universally, women are subjected to oppressive systems of patriarchy. In Palestine, women struggle against domestic violence and economic and legal inequality. 1 in 5 girls marries before her 18th birthday. Women earn 27% less than men, and nearly 30% of women have been exposed to domestic violence. But do not mistake these as Palestinian issues. The reality is that these are issues plaguing nearly all corners of the globe. Yet, in Palestine, along with the patriarchy, women are also under an occupation which grows more and more fierce every day. We have seen entire communities demolished and left homeless. Millions of us stand to lose access to education and healthcare after the USA cut our UN funding this year. Where were the SDGs then? In 2017 alone, 55 Palestinian women were held in Israeli prisons, 12 of whom were just girls, and 16 of whom were mothers. For many Palestinian women, there is no way to reach a hospital without crossing an Israeli checkpoint. So this means that between 2000 and 2005, 67 Palestinian mothers gave birth at military checkpoints. 36 of their babies died. And yet, we are not victims. All around me, women are taking matters into their own hands. From gender institutes and safe houses to women-run NGOs and cooperatives, women have mobilized against these forces of oppression. And I wanted to join them. The day that I put on my Not Your Habibti jacket, my world changed. This jacket became the conduit to reclaiming my body as beautiful, powerful, and entirely my own. Not your Habibti. These words started a community for young women in Palestine to step forward and speak out, knowing they are not alone. So, I started making these jackets for everyone. And this eventually led to the founding of my startup, Baby Fist, a socially conscious fashion brand which focuses on Palestinian women's rights and donates proceeds to women's empowerment projects. To support the local economy, all of the apparel is created in the West Bank and in Gaza. Just this month, we launched a grassroots menstrual education campaign. We are working with doctors and pharmacists to educate schoolgirls about their periods, to equip them with supplies, and to destigmatize womanhood. I run and organize workshops which allow women to share their stories on gender-based violence, gender-based discrimination, and occupation. We challenge one another to speak our truth and understand why we should not be afraid or ashamed. It is a bold and dangerous act to speak out against the forces which seek to suppress us. But speaking out is the only means to healing, empowerment, and enacting change. And so we dare say to one another, اتكلمي حقيقتك. Speak your truth. Our stories have become our sources of strength. The story of the Palestinian woman is not one of oppression, but rather one of resilience in the face of it.
Kumi. Kumi, do you want to introduce Owen?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
So it's my very great pleasure to introduce a fellow African, somebody who's doing amazing work, not just in his own country, Burundi, but also in his region. Erwin Iradukunda is the director for programs at a NGO called MOLI, which focuses on LGBTIQ rights. Those of you who understand the context in Africa will know working for LGBTI rights is one of the most riskiest areas of activism you can be engaged in. So it's my real pleasure to meet him here today, and as fellow Africans, we want to say something to the Africans in the audience, that the future of Africa depends on the integration, social, economic, and political integration of the peoples of Africa. We were divided by colonialism at a conference that happened in Berlin many moons ago. And for example, if Europe can have a euro, we don't see why Africa can't have an afro, and I'm not talking about a hairstyle. Erwin has written poetry, has had a film done about him, he has been profiled globally, but while he focuses on LGBTIQ issues, he, like all of us these days, wherever we live in the world, is also having to focus on a very real issue that restricts the ability of people to participate in public life, and what in the jargon is called shrinking civic space or shrinking democratic space. And actually in many cases, you know, when you use the word shrinking, there's still something left when something shrinks, you can see it. And in many places you could call it shutting down of space for civil society that we are seeing in many places. So he is in the front line of that struggle. It is people like him that are the heroes of Africa and the Global South, and I invite you to give him a very warm round of applause. You want to speak here with it?
On the 21st of December 2000, the Netherlands signed into law the first same-sex marriage bill in the world. 9 years after, in 2009, in my country, Burundi, homosexuality was made a crime, and since LGBT people have faced the threats of up to 2 years of jail simply on account of their sexuality. Last year, Burundi became one of the first countries in the world to withdraw from the International Criminal Court based here in The Hague. We are one of the poorest countries on earth, and for the past 12 years have been struggling to escape an ethnic-based civil war. The president has been in power since 2005 and could remain in office until 2034. We face a downward spiral of human rights abuses. At the time I'm speaking, many civil society activists have been forced into exile for speaking out against the regime. It's against this background that I work as a human rights defender. But because of the laws, I must work in shadows. My story is one of an ordinary young man who stood up when he felt his life would have been not worth living if he had remained silent. I raise awareness on human rights violations perpetrated on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity through publications and also engaging human rights mechanisms such as the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. In 2016, I edited Walking the Tightrope, Poetry and Prose from LGBTQ Writers from Africa, a poetry anthology that seeks to challenge and engage those who consider homosexuality immoral and un-African. It was published all around the world and read by thousands of people. It has helped to challenge the perception of what it means to be African and LGBT. Life for LGBT people in Africa is not easy. A survey conducted in 15 countries by the African Queer Youth Initiative, an organization of which I am a supporter, showed how LGBT people suffer from verbal, physical, and emotional abuse. African respondents to that say that evictions from homes, workplaces, and communities were their foremost concerns. They feared rejection by their family and clans, their friends, and the church. So 7 years ago, when I was 19, I did my first visit in rural Burundi on a project towards ending HIV. I met Eric, who was also 19 and ran an LGBT group. I had a discussion with the group about their lived realities. They suffer family evictions and school dropouts as parents cut them off from financial support. All of the group had at least once been rejected by employers because of who they are. All this discrimination and stigmatization increases the likelihood of HIV as people are not informed about the risks of unprotected sex amongst the LGBTQ community. The lack of support for LGBT people can be life-threatening. In 3 years, HIV prevalence in Burundi amongst 18 to 35 years old men who have sex with men grew from 2.4% to 6%. My own story is one of social denial, harassment, and persecution. And because of that, I went through depression, substance abuse, public discrediting of my work, permanent fear, and hiding for my safety. The SDGs are supposed to leave no one behind. We should not deny rights such as access to health services, education, safe housing, justice, and protection from violence because of discrimination over sexual orientation and gender identity. We all deserve a chance to realize our full potential, regardless of where we come from, what we believe in, who we love, or how we express our gender identity. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's such an honor to introduce Tamana Asi today. As an Afghan, I'm just so heartened to meet people like Tamana. It's the first time we've met, but I know about her work. And I want to give you some context as to why I'm so impressed and so positive about our country. In 2002, when we first returned to Afghanistan, we basically saw a nation that was zombie-like. There were no women at schools, there were no women teachers, there were no women working. The country had been beaten down by the Taliban and the previous regime, which was an Islamist regime for over a decade. Now, we weren't particularly hopeful, but we thought we should go and we should become active in the country, hoping that we could facilitate social change in Afghanistan, not knowing what was going to end, how it was going to end up. But today, you were 10 when the Taliban were removed, not wanting to give away your age. But, and since then, you graduated from university, you became a medical doctor, and now you work for AFSO, this NGO that's doing amazing work. And they're doing this sort of subtle, below the radar work that governments cannot achieve, but you can. So this particular organization, you only have 5 people. You do advocacy work, you do research, you do awareness of issues, capacity building. And the one achievement, I'm sure you've done a lot of other things, is that you've criminalized forced virginity testing. In a place like Afghanistan, it's a tool used to intimidate women. And these are things that we, as a large media organization, governments, others have not been able to achieve, and yet the small NGO systematically and methodically goes about its work and has finally managed to criminalize this sort of heinous act. I give you Tamana Asi.
I am from Afghanistan, a war-torn country ranked as one of the most dangerous places in the world to be born a woman. A shocking amount of women are victims of rape, mutilation, honor killings, self-immolation, and domestic violence. 87% of Afghan women experience at least one form of physical, psychological, or sexual violence. 80% of Afghan women and children are forced into marriages. One of the worst forms of torture women undergo is virginity or hymen testing. More than 90% of Afghan women charged with having committed moral crimes are convicted solely on the basis of hymen examination. These so-called moral crimes range from a mere suspicion of meeting a male colleague unsupervised to eloping. Almost all such examinations are performed under duress, with often several people present in the room. Victims are ridiculed, ostracized, and insulted by health professionals. In some cases, rape victims, including children, are subjected to this torturous exam multiple times. I have worked with rape victims who recall their experience as a second rape. A suicidal woman told me that because of the procedure, she no longer felt her body belonged to her. Another patient was beaten and marginalized as she tested negative on her wedding night. This trauma followed her throughout her life. The impact of the test was so huge that subconsciously affected her entire life and social interactions. As a result, she wasn't willing to allow her daughters to get married, as she feared they would end up in the same situation. Hymen testing often leads to social stigmatization. It has caused honor killings. Women who are not pardoned by their families for failing the test often turn to drastic measures like self-immolation to end their feeling of shame, guilt, isolation, and suffering. Even those who get a clean bill of health are left to suffer long-term psychological consequences, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, isolation, and social exclusion. I work as a medical expert and trainer in banning virginity testing in Afghanistan. In 2016, I joined the campaign of banning virginity testing and became the first female medical doctor to stand against it. Our work is mainly focused in the high-risk areas of Afghanistan. We mainly focus on the lack of scientific validity behind virginity testing and how it violates human rights. It is a myth that the absence of an intact hymen indicates engagement in sexual intercourse. I repeat, it is a myth. As part of our efforts, we address this issue through advocacy and partnership with a working committee that consists of national and international organizations. We host workshops, scientific seminars, and raise awareness through education campaigns for thousands of people. We have conducted research in prisons, shelters, and courts. We published a manual on virginity testing and translated several scientific declarations and reports against it. We have trained more than 1,000 defense lawyers and legal aid providers to help the victims. We campaigned fiercely to criminalize hymen testing. We were accused of promoting Western culture and promiscuity. We endured being ridiculed and ostracized and insulted. However, we persisted. As a result, forced virginity and hymen testing was criminalized in the new penal code on May 2017. However, hymen testing has continued to take place legally with a court order, informed consent, and is still culturally practiced illegally. Forced virginity testing threatens inherent human rights such as human security and bodily integrity. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is a form of inhuman, cruel, and degrading treatment, recognized as a grave form of violence, torture, and even rape. We will continue our work until it is both legally and culturally banned in Afghanistan. Our fight is not yet over. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll stand for a little bit. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. This young woman, and I won't give her age, has already accomplished more in life than most people do in an entire lifetime. Sata Sharif comes from Liberia, where many years after the end of this country's civil war in 2003, sexual violence continues to present a significant threat to the physical security of women and children. Sadly and disturbingly, the rape of minors is the most frequently reported incident of sexual and gender-based violence in Liberia. Sata saw what was happening in her country and at a very young age decided to do something about it. As an advocate for children's rights, she's the founder and executive director of Youth in Action for Peace and Empowerment. She represents the girls and children of Liberia at the headquarters of the African Union and United Nations. She has previously served as a peer educator raising awareness of the stigma surrounding young people with HIV. She has been in the spotlight for her call for investigations into the rapes and murders of children in Liberia. And I can tell you, she's just getting started. She will not stop fighting until all young people in her country are safe and protected. I had the opportunity to meet with Sata earlier today, and she's truly an inspiration. And now it is my distinct honor to bring her to the stage to inspire all of you. Please welcome Sata Sharif.
Thank you. I was born during the Liberian Civil War. At a time in my country's history when 200,000 Liberians died and over 1 million more were displaced. The war destroyed our infrastructures, economy, and natural resources. Today, Liberian children are still paying the price. I became an advocate for the rights of children when I was 9 years old. When I found out that a friend, a 13-year-old, was due to be married to a 39-year-old man, I felt it wasn't right. I raised the alarm and engaged community leaders, and the marriage was stopped. You see, in Liberia, 36% of girls are married before age 18. About 9% are married before their 15th birthday. My own mother was also a victim of child marriage. Girls in this position are robbed of their chance to own their own decisions and to decide on their own. Child marriage has no respect for the Sustainable Development Goals. It violates a girl's right to education, her right to health, safety, and well-being. It is not enough to sympathize with girls who are raped and molested. The process will only stop if we tackle these perpetrators, if we can stand up with these girls and give them a hope that they too can stand up. Since the 2% of Liberian children in the primary school age are out of school, more and more children are made to sell goods during school hours in Monrovia. Many Liberian children are breadwinners. Every day there are horrifying reports of rape, child abuse, and the mysterious death of children. In 2017, 1,685 sexual and gender-based violence cases were reported in Liberia. Of that figure, almost 80% were children under the age of 17 years. I will not stand for this. As a way of helping to reduce violence against children, I organized rallies, sitting actions, petitions, and marches to fight for the rights of children, which hold our government accountable to our laws. At age 16, I was elected as the first female speaker of the Liberian Children's Parliament. Last year, I founded Youth in Action for Peace and Empowerment, a children and youth-driven NGO. We've printed over 20,000 copies of the Liberian Children's Law Simplified version to create awareness on children's rights in Liberia. We run a monthly mentorship program for 200 girls who have become agents of change in their communities. We have produced textbooks and provided assorted school items for children in rural communities in Liberia. In July of 2018, we organized a national 1K walk to bring 1,000 children and young people together in protest to stand up against violence against children and girls in Liberia. When a 13-year-old was impregnated and raped by a lawmaker in Liberia, we acted together. Through my advocacy and leadership as the Speaker of the Liberian Children's Parliament, an investigation was conducted into the case. The lawmaker was arrested and his case was sent to court. Justice must not be contingent on one's status or worth in society. Children have rights too, and every child deserves better. One young boy, I encourage you to start up something and do something because the children everywhere deserve better. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Amber Heard, and I feel tremendously honored and humbled to be able to share the stage with such incredible voices, hearts, and minds, to share it with all of you who have gathered here today to exchange ideas, motivation, and it's my true, deep honor to introduce to you a woman that it's hard to describe when you meet somebody that empowers you, reminds you of the best part of who you really wish you were, who you wish you could be. A woman a person that speaks to your humanity, your strength, and reminds you with their actions every day that you could do better. When I asked Ibtisam, I asked her, what drives you? You feel this injustice. She, like everyone here today, is and has a finely tuned sense of injustice. And as we see our world change rapidly, as we have increasing access to information, community, and resources, we too have an increasing awareness of what needs to be done, of our responsibility. And that can be frustrating. We're increasingly aware at the same time of the world's injustices and the people they affect. And Ibtisam is someone who sees that injustice and turns that into action. So when I asked her, aren't you frustrated? What are your frustrations? What do you do with that rage that we all have when we look around at our world and see such grave injustice permeate into all aspects of society? What do you do with it? And she said, well, it gives me strength, just like that. And so with that, Ibtisam, it is truly my honor to present you here today. Thank you so much for being such an inspiration.
Thank you very much.
You are in a city which has its whole identity wrapped up in human rights. Just up the road from here is the International Criminal Court. We are home to the International Court of Justice and the Peace Palace, where we were last night for the wonderful opening ceremony. Human rights is an industry here, and yet there is another side to this city. I had the taste of it when I was 16 years old and at school. I was wearing a headscarf, and like many of my peers, I was looking for an after-school job in a store. Luckily, I found one, but I wasn't allowed to wear a headscarf while working there. I needed the money, so I took the job and took my headscarf off during working hours. After a while, it didn't feel right anymore. My headscarf was and is part of my identity as a Moroccan. My identity as a Moroccan Dutch Muslim woman, but it wasn't allowed here in The Hague. My identity was denied. Because of this, I quit my after-school job. When I walked out, it was the best decision of my life. I promised myself I was going to work to stop this kind of discrimination happening to others. I said, never again. A couple of years later, my younger sister was also prevented from wearing a headscarf at work. I helped her to bring a successful legal case for discrimination. In this city of justice, we'll still need better laws and law enforcement to protect the nearly 500,000 Muslim women in this country. I wish My sister and I were the only ones facing this kind of discrimination. That our cases were an exception here in the Netherlands, but we are not. 3 years ago, we started our organization, Meld Islamophobie, because we expected an Islamophobic backlash to recent terror attacks. We had seen it before, after 9/11. With our work, we have exposed Islamophobia that many would never associate with the Netherlands. This, after all, is a country that is internationally known as a land of tolerance, equality, freedom, diversity, and yes, a defender of human rights. A land that, after the Second World War, supposedly said never again to racism and fascism. Try telling that to the 26-year-old Muslim woman who found herself sexually assaulted on a tram where she was traveling with her 2 preschool children. The man who attacked her pinched her bottom and shouted, "Let's see what they hide behind their headscarves." She went to the police to report it, but was told she should treat the assault as a compliment. They refused to help her. What we have uncovered with our work goes deeper. We found that 90% of victims who reported to us were female, many wearing headscarves. 1/3 suffered physical violence. 2/3 were attacked in public space in daylight. Most attackers were white men. Islamophobia is not only a structural problem. We are also seeing a normalization of Islamophobia in Dutch society. It means that many anti-Muslim statements that would have been unacceptable 20 years ago are now treated normal. It means we found it normal that during a job interview, employers are more interested in your opinion about ISIS than they are in your relevant work experience. Normalization means also that we found it normal that people are excluded and treated as second-class citizens because of being Muslim. It means we are not given equal opportunities. We are prevented from developing our true potential. This infringes our human rights to quality of life. We were born here. We speak Dutch. We think and dream in Dutch. But we're always seen as the other. Tolerance, equality, freedom, diversity, inclusion, and human rights are nice-sounding marketing words. But if you're going to talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk. So let's start. So let's start today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, young leaders from all over the world, and good afternoon to fellow councillors and colleagues here. One Young World calls itself a charity on its website, but you and me will agree that it's more than a charity. It is a platform where young leaders from all over the world connect their lights in order to create a better world. It is a platform where young leaders and other leaders come together to discuss how do we change fear into hope, and how do we banish the darkness in the world. And the leaders that we're here to listen to come from all over the world. Among them is the young leader that I'm about to introduce. I'm in awe of this young leader because he's one of those people who believe that it is very important to fight for justice for ourselves. But it's equally important to fight for justice for others, because justice is not just us. It is something more. This one young leader is a leader who has chosen to use adversity into a stepping stone to lead the world to a better way of treating humanity. When we face adversity, we can respond as victims or we can respond as leaders. In his case, he has responded to a tragedy on gender violence, in a manner that has given him a platform to alert the world to the wrong way we handle the public narrative on gender violence. Among the things he has done is write a book, The Lighthouse, to highlight gender violence, but more importantly, to help me, you, and the media to handle the public narrative on this important subject more constructively. Because through that public narrative, we can be part of the problem or part of the solution. When I spoke to Luke, he said at some stage he was worried about being an advocate for gender violence, because there's always a feeling, why should men speak for women? But you remember that the reason today we have women's rights was not just because women fought for their own rights. It was also because men like Luke Hart decided that as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. Men like John Stuart Mill stood together with advocates for women's rights to say, this is not the right way. And today, as we go through the Me Too movement and many other struggles that seek to ensure that everyone enjoys human rights, we count on men like Luke Hart to co-create a better world with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Luke Hart.
Thank you. Women's lives are most at threat from the men that they live with, their husbands and their fathers. 50% of female victims of homicide are killed by a partner or an ex-partner, as opposed to only 3% for men. 3/4 of female victims of homicide are killed at home, where women should feel safest. And even in the UK, the few victims that manage to flee are left to lead the remainder of their lives as fugitives. Domestic violence and abuse is one of the most prevalent human rights violations of our time. Despite this, the media often still ignores the prevalence of domestic abuse. And it represents domestic homicides as if they're rare and isolated incidents. But the reality is that 1 in 3 women around the world have or will experience domestic abuse in their lifetimes. And globally in 2016, 4 times as many deaths occurred due to homicides than war. Domestic violence is a pervasive problem in every corner of our world. On the 19th of July 2016, something unimaginable happened to me and my younger brother Ryan. My father shot my mother Claire and my 19-year-old sister Charlotte. He then committed suicide. Their murders occurred in my hometown, in the car park of a swimming pool. Ryan and I only survived because we were working abroad at the time. And only 5 days before, we had raised enough money and moved our mother and sister away from our abusive father. But the press coverage that followed the murder of my mother and sister described that incident as incredibly rare. One report went as far as to call it understandable. In every report, there was speculation that the prospect of divorce drove our father to murder, implying that we were responsible for his actions. Yet we had struggled our entire lives against our father. But our struggles had been invisible for 25 years. Our father drove our family into poverty with his gambling. And when I was 3 years old, he moved us to a rural farmhouse, away from family and friends, where neither of my parents worked for a decade, and we simply lived off the land and grew our own food. He did this to isolate us and to exercise control. Because of him, our family was never free. A common rationalization for my father's actions was that he must have had a hard childhood. However, my mother and sister had been through so much more suffering than him. yet they had only chosen love in response to their suffering. They showed Ryan and I that our father's behaviour was not understandable, and it was not inevitable. My father's abuse of my family was an active choice that he made every single day. Violence against women and children cannot be blamed on the mental health of perpetrators or on victims' actions. It can only be understood by the perpetrator's demand for control. Even something as trivial as the media referring to the suicide note that our father had written made our struggles invisible. And it showed the control that our father still had over the narrative, the same control he'd always exerted over our lives. It was a suicide note to our father, but it was a murder note to my mother and sister. Cruelty is always a choice. And so is the perspective that bystanders take towards that abuse and violence. Only when we choose to understand victims' perspectives do we truly stand in solidarity against the abuse of women and children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. You're so brave. Well done. Must have been really hard.
So, and to thank the councillors and the delegate speakers and ask you to leave the stage, thank you.